Welcome back to the Marc Claire Show. My guest today is actually my co-host on my other podcast, which I hope you listen to. It's called the Second Print Comics Podcast. Go ahead and check that out if you haven't already. But he's also the former host and producer of a couple shows that we're going to be discussing today, known as The Haunted Republic and The Witching Hour. Very pleased to welcome for the first time to the Marc Claire Show, even though I talk to him about comics every week, Remso Martinez. What's up, Remso?
My wife would say every day, but
every day. That's an exact. Well, I mean, there's probably a message every day of some sort. That's probably true. I probably talk to you second only to my wife at this point. And some days maybe not even second only, to be honest. But depends on the day.
Depends on the day.
That being said, Remso, we're going to be getting into some interesting stories today because, since I've started the show, a subject that kind of just continues to come up in one way or another are spirits, spiritual influences, demonic forces, things of this nature. And it's kind of like with libertarianism, all the people I'm talking to, well, not all the people, some of the people that do actually have experience with them. But a large part of it is the sort of the philosophical concepts behind spirits and this sort of thing. You are sort of like the post-libertarian. You're not just someone who talked about spirits. You've actually encountered them and actually gone out of your way to encounter them. And before I go further on this, whether you agree with the disclaimer I'm going to give or not, I'm going to give it. Do not try this at home. Do not try anything we're going to talk about on your own at home. That might be hypocritical, but Remso's not the one saying it. I'm the one saying it. Do not try this at home. That being said, let's talk a little bit more about it. And before we do, I think it would behoove us to maybe get a little bit of your background, particularly maybe focusing on your religious background and things of that nature to sort of tie into where we're going to go with this.
And I just think that this is so serendipitous too, because as we were discussing like kind of the topics that we were going to go ahead and talk about today, I was going back through a lot of old footage, everything which is available on our YouTube channel, Argos Paranormal on YouTube. But when I started doing this whole crazy nonsense, let's go back to 2017, Mark. What were we doing? We were talking about libertarian stuff, hosting libertarian podcasts. I know you could say this about yourself, but I was a completely different person 6-7 years ago.
100%.
And what's funny about this is that it was because I started doing the whole ghost hunting thing that a lot of significant changes came in my life, not just professionally, but personally. And I think the personal changes led to the professional changes. The big thing that I want people to know is that when I started doing this in 2017, I was a recent college graduate. I was hosting a podcast. I told my parents, Mom, Dad, give me 1 year to try and be a full-time content creator. And if I don't succeed, I will try something else. I promise you. So I had my lucky producer, my brother, Ryan. He was running my show. And at that point, we were doing the whole political commentator, young Latino libertarian type of thing. But we quickly realized like, shit, we're running out of content to talk about and we need to do something to kind of break out. And
you can only talk about how tacos are libertarian so
many times. I mean, those roads will pave themselves somehow, but it's it was at a point where it was like, we were really desperate to change things up, and it gets monotonous after a while. So we were watching Ghost Adventures one night, and this was around the end of the semester. And we were looking at each other. We're like, what we should do after I graduate and everything, we should go ahead and maybe do like a little bonus series. We should do like, Remso and Ryan go check out haunted places, and maybe that'll get people interested in other stuff too. So that way we can have some fun in addition to it. But quickly, we started asking ourselves, like, what do we really believe about this stuff? And for the most part, Ryan did, because Ryan had some experiences, and I can talk a little bit about that later. But as far as I was concerned, I didn't really know if this stuff was serious. And while I was a fan of watching all the stuff on Travel Channel and Discovery and History, I cannot honestly say that I believed in any of it. So the first couple Haunted Republics we did, which were available on our Patreon, were like 5-minute little vlogs of us going to haunted places at night, walking around saying, this is bullshit. And then it was over. It wasn't until we actually worked with some financiers to secure an actual documentary that we were going to go film that we went to a location called St. Albans Sanatorium. That's the focus of our first documentary, Haunted Republic, St. Albans Sanatorium. And by the end of that night, we were there for about 14 hours. I had my entire freaking world change. So with all that to basically say, I grew up Christian. I grew up and thought that, maybe this stuff is happening, but can anyone really prove it? I mean, I've never seen, I've never felt it. Kind of hypocritical if you think about it. I believe in the death and the resurrection of a man who called himself God. I believe in a book that talks about demons and spirits and stuff like that, but I don't really believe it. So it was this half in, half out type of thing that I think a lot of people of faith deal with. So it wasn't until we kind of took that leap and we went to one of the most haunted places in Virginia and we locked ourselves in there and we filmed everything raw, that things just nothing could stay the same after that. After that, we were hooked. Ryan and I went ahead and produced a couple more Haunted Republic documentaries, but then at that point, it was more popular than the podcast I was doing. And it was just out of control successful. So we had a conversation. I said, how about you go ahead and produce and direct a series? We'll still use all my, marketing and social media infrastructure we have in place, and we'll go ahead and market this ourselves. But while we're at it, how about we actually, form a paranormal group so we can work with other like-minded people to figure out more about this? Because it was about the show itself, but the show's whole purpose was us simply documenting the crazy, weird shit that was happening around us. So that's how our paranormal team, Argos Paranormal, was formed. That's also how our TV series, The Witching Hour, started. It started with a couple of public access networks, jumped to about 17 across the country, was getting picked up in places across the nation, and we did really well on YouTube. And from there, I mean, it was like an overnight success. I was on the radio of Jason Hawes from the show Ghost Hunters with his group Taps. I was on of Jim Harold, who has the #1 paranormal podcast in the world, simply called the Paranormal Podcast. I've spoken with basically all the leading figures in modern ghost hunting and paranormal research, minus a few names. And it was just, it was wild because while you had a lot of people online filming things, a lot of the stuff you couldn't tell whether or not it was CGI, the way that we were approaching it, the way that we were filming it, and also the fact that I was trying at the time to become a fledgling reporter, I had a lot of my reputation on the line. So with that, I had more at stake, and that's what really pressed us to try and be as objective as possible as we were going through this. I mean, as I look back, Mark, watching those clips, it's amazing the things I didn't know at the time. It's amazing the things I've seen since. And when I look back at it, I have a very distinctly different view of the world than I ever would have if I had not questioned whether or not this stuff is actually happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine. And there's a lot of different directions that we can think to go here. I think it is sort of, no matter how you experience the mystical, for some people, it might be a psychedelic journey of some kind. For other people, it might be their first night in a haunted, whatever it may be, haunted, what do you call it? Insane asylum. That's the word I was looking for. A haunted asylum, whatever it may be. But once you encounter it in some way, it would be pretty hard to not at least like create a world for you or alter your worldview in some way or confirm your worldview in some way once you know that there is this other thing. And because it really just then it opens up everything at that point. So you were just to dig into this a little more. I know you were raised Christian. I believe you went to Liberty University. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Like the Christian University of
the one.
Right. So before we even dive into this more, I'm curious how. I don't know how much of your classes in Liberty University, how much of it is like religion class or
a lot
of it.
I took like 18 credits worth of university core classes, which, dealt with theology, demonology, biblical worldview, evangelism. Like, I was knees deep in it.
Okay. So that's interesting because that was my follow-up question. So you actually took an entire course on demonology. Is that right?
It was part of theology. I took about a year of theology, and part of Christian theology is looking into demonology. And I got to be honest, at the time, I was taking this as an online class. I was on Wikipedia, just going through it. I was just like, this is just, I'm interested in this stuff. This is stuff that I believe, but this isn't stuff that's going to help me. I was a political science major. I was ready to graduate. I was an officer in the National Guard. Of all the things I consider a priority, learning about, the different types of angels in heaven and learning about the different layers of hell, cool. But I had more important priorities. Women, getting out of campus at night. I just wanted to leave and have fun. So it wasn't until about 2 years later, I actually went back to a lot of my old college textbooks, and I was like, I know this shit is in here. I Googled it at one point, but it's it's not one of those things that clicks unless you have a real reason to understand it. And it's funny now, if you look at my Audible library, because I listen to more books than I read these days, about 90% of the books I listen to at any given basis are looking at demonology, or looking at examples and cases of possession, or looking at parapsychology, or looking at the science that is going into it, stuff that's looking into the theory of multiple gods mentioned within the Old Testament. Now it's become a part of my life because, like you mentioned, once you kind of peek over the veil and look out, something looks back at you, and life is not the same afterwards. So yeah, I didn't take it seriously. I didn't. I knew about this stuff. I had working knowledge, but I didn't treat it with the respect that I do now.
It was more like, all right, that's what this ancient religion believes. Maybe it's true, maybe not. Does it really matter? It was just not something that was a rigorous part of what you needed to know in life.
Yeah, my priority was passing the class, get out, and move on with my life. Because around the time I was doing this, I was doing the Remso Republic podcast. I was trying to become a media figure, and the only reason I went into any of this was because I needed more content, and it seemed interesting. The way that it went, though, it's funny because there are people that know me for a couple of things I've done. I've published books. I've done podcasts. I've been a political commentator. Then there's a whole segment of the world that only knows me as Remso Martinez, paranormal investigator. And it's really funny because if I had to pick one of those to be known by, it would be Remso Martinez, paranormal investigator. Not because not because I discovered anything that was new. And I say that very specifically, not because I discovered anything that was new. It's because the way that I and my team, and I have to go ahead and give credit where credit's due. My brother Ryan, who was the lead director and producer for the Witching Hour, which is the first paranormal TV show to actually win major awards for multiple film contests and stuff like that. There were people who were harsh critics. There were people that were extremely skeptical. There were people that had no opinion of this stuff whatsoever. They watched us, they talked to us, they listened to us, and suddenly they came to their own conclusions that there are things existing in our reality that sometimes might not have an explanation, but are occurring nonetheless.
All right, so let's go to that first. Well, it wasn't the first thing you investigated, but the first one when you stayed overnight in the asylum. That was really the night that changed your view on things. Because prior to this, it sounds like you were more like doing this to almost debunk it, if anything else, for the first few, when you just thought you didn't necessarily.
I was Ashton Kutcher. I was going to places saying this is stupid,
trying to punk these ghosts. Huh?
Yeah.
So what was that? How did you first choose that particular asylum? Like, where did you hear about it? How did you learn about it? And then going into that, did you, like you did with the other ones, did you think this is just some nonsense and we're going to go and just film some debunking bullshit? So when on that journey did you start to realize, oh, there's something to this?
As we were trying to figure out what to do, we wanted to do like a longer form documentary because we were doing the short form content, but we were like, if we do a longer form film, at least an hour long or something. I think the updated director's cut of it is about an hour, and it's free online. People can go see it, but we were like, if we can go ahead and do this and people actually see that we're taking it seriously, then maybe they will go ahead and sign up for a bunch of our other things and we can actually make some money, because being a content creator doesn't bring in a lot of money when you're just starting out of college and you're not really good at it. So at that point, the thing that we had realized is you've got really two types of experiences if you want to watch any of this stuff happen. One, you watch it on TV and you're hoping that the networks are being honest with you with these shows. And I could tell you about one of my network stories with one of the big ones later as to why we did not go on a cable network. But the other option was you're going to sign up for one of these ghost tours at one of these hotels or one of these places, and you're going to go out with a crowd of people in the middle of the night, and they're going to tell you spooky stories, and someone might jump out at you, and you're going to have 5 minutes at each location, and nothing is going to happen, and you just wasted like $70 on it. So we went ahead and found an opportunity going on at St. Albans Sanatorium in Radford, Virginia. It was being put on by a group called Ghost Hunts USA. Now, Ghost Hunts USA had some crazy footage from their lockdowns. Basically, what they did was they would go ahead and for like 4 or 5 hours, they'd spend like an hour walking you around this location, and they do it across the country. They'd walk you around for an hour, walking around the location, telling you a little bit about it. But then what they would do is they would give you all the tools that you see on like Ghost Adventures or Ghost Hunters or something like that, or Destination Fear. And they would let you run around and do whatever, film whatever. They would just let you do it. So we thought, okay, this is going to be our big case, whether or not these people are fucking with us. So we sign up for this tour. We bring our own stuff that's not tampered. And after the hour is over, we basically separate from everyone. This is St. Albans Sanatorium, built on an Indian cemetery, was a former all boys school, was a site for the Civil War, eventually became an insane asylum. Hundreds of years of crazy shit.
That checks a lot of boxes.
It's checking everything. And I mean, the stories there, every room had a freaking story. It was like Silent Hill on crack. It was just like, this is like everything you could possibly want is here. This is like a portal to hell. And we separate from everybody, and we're running to the far end of the building because we didn't want anyone to contaminate their stuff. Now, at that point, Ryan had done a previous hunt with our father, and he had been taught some techniques from some of the ghost hunters that he had, observed as to how to properly look for stuff. So it was at that point, we started off with something called a flashlight session. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, this is a waste of time. If it goes on or off, it's one of those little twisty flash mag lights. We just put batteries in. It's like, this is stupid. There's obviously a button somewhere. And there's one reason why we brought our things, because we're like, how do we know their stuff isn't rigged or something?
Right.
I don't know.
You're saying when you watch it on another show,
they're probably just or even the stuff that they would have provided us. They would have given us, lights and Phasma boxes and the stuff that detects like stud finders and that type of stuff. They would have given us all that stuff, but we were like, we don't want to use your stuff. We want to use our stuff because we know where our stuff came from. So we have all our cameras set up. At this point, I was working with like a Sony Rebel Canon and a GoPro that I had like fixed on to a giant flashlight I had. So we were like really mundane at the time. We got really sophisticated later. But, we're in this area where this nurse died. It was a hydrotherapy room, and this nurse apparently died in there. She was maybe like, I forget what it was. I don't know if she died in there like naturally or she had been like killed by a patient. But this hydrotherapy room.
Is hydrotherapy just waterboarding for mental patients?
Oh, basically. It's horrible. No, like it's horrible. Like going in there, I was just like, I don't know what this stuff is, but this is kind of fucked up.
So we're in there. Where, like, we think anyway, like some really scary shit, like horror.
This is one flew over the cuckoo's nest. Okay. Like this is where you send like like this is where like Papa Kennedy sends his daughter to go get lobotomized. Like this is that type of place. So we're in there and we have everything set up. And after like 5 minutes, Ryan is like talking out into the ether, and I'm just observing this. I'm like, what the fuck is happening? And next, out of nowhere, I don't know why. I think I know why he said this, but he's like, if you're here, can you turn the light on? And that little thing just turned on. And I'm like, well, that's fucking ironic. And you see this. You see this
at the time, you're thinking ironic, still not necessarily supernatural.
I freaked out. I pissed myself a little bit, but then I was like, okay, ironic. And you see this in the footage. Ryan is having a full-on fucking conversation with this thing. And he's telling it, blink 3 times, it is happening. And the thing is blinking 3 times. And I'm looking at him.
And again, I'm looking at the light you just bought from
we bought from Walmart
hardware store.
Like that day. I put the batteries in myself. This is happening. And I'm just like, this is insane. If this is real, there is no way that this is actually happening. And I mean, this stuff happened throughout the entire building. And we're talking every type of evidence you can imagine. We had about 30 minutes later, we left a recorder in this room in the lodging floor where the bedrooms actually used to be. And you got this in the director's cut because we had filmed so much. Like, we left some stuff out. It wasn't until Ryan was deleting files that we found some things in some footage and in some recordings that we were like, oh, this changes the whole thing. That's why we did a director's cut. But like, I remember we, like, 30 minutes later, we were on the top floor where they used to like live and stuff. And we leave a recorder on the table. A year after we put out the documentary, we're going through clearing stuff, as I mentioned. Ryan listens to that recorder footage. We actually find the video file that filmed the recorder. And at the time, the video file didn't pick up anything. It didn't pick up anything. And this was a brand new digital recorder. But however, when we listened to the audio recording from the recorder, and I don't know why we clicked it, but you hear something. Ryan is like, okay, if no one's here, we're going to leave. We leave the room. As soon as Ryan says, okay, we're going to leave, me and him walk out of the room. We left the recorder there a little bit longer. In the recording, you hear somebody scream. And I'm not talking like a person. It like raises the freaking like goosebumps on my arms. It sounds like something out of that video game Doom. Did you ever play Doom?
I did, actually. Finally, okay, some game we've both played with our age gap. But yes, of course I did.
Yeah. So you know how in like Doom 3, when the graphics were actually good?
Don't bring me to Doom 3. I said I played Doom.
Okay. Doom. Well,
that's how old I am.
For people that know the demons in Doom, when they're like you hear that scream, it's like an inhuman scream. You hear that in that recording. And we look over the footage and everything, and we had been using that recorder for like hundreds of hours of recordings across the next couple of years. So we knew that the recorder was not broken. We looked and we saw the audio and everything, and straight up, it's as if somebody sat right next to it and just screamed this angry, inhuman scream. And that, that's one of those things that happened. It's an example of like, I mean, it's a short documentary. You see a lot of different things clumped in a minute, but I mean, we were there for hours and hours, and most of the time we were by ourselves. We teamed up with a few other ghost hunters who were ironically kind of there to do the same thing as us. And everyone walked out that night having something that either they only witnessed or having something that somebody else witnessed with them. Shadow figures, items turning, that were cool one minute, turning into, as hot coal the next minute. Photos taken with a flash in which you see giant gray, like, masses in front of them. I mean, so much stuff did not make it in the documentary. That was what the hard part was. How much do we show and how much do we not show before people really start thinking like, is this too much? Like, that was a legit question. But yeah, I mean, that night I remember driving out and I looked at Ryan. I think I talk about it. I do like a post monologue at the end of the documentary. I'm like, I don't understand what happened, but what happened. And I don't have an explanation for it. I don't have an answer for it, but it's real. It's here. It's a controlled and non-controlled phenomenon, as in you can voluntarily cause something to happen and things will happen to you involuntarily. And I don't know what's real anymore. I joked about it. I'm like, I don't know what's real. And the next day we woke up because we stayed in town. We were going to do the long drive back from Radford to Northern Virginia. And I just looked at Ryan. I'm like, okay, so this kind of changes the whole thing now. Like, nothing is the same after this. Like,
which could be true on a couple levels. It changes the whole thing you're doing and changes the whole thing of life.
I was excited. I was excited because I was like, oh, we can actually make some money off of this. We can actually get a little popularity off of this. But then I was also like, but what does that mean for me? Like,
right.
I was.
What does that expose you to have to show people this?
Yeah, because I'm like, if this is happening, then the base understanding is that I'm dealing with either human spirits or I'm dealing with like intangible entities that can somehow manipulate physical things around me in order to cause stuff to happen. And I don't know where they came from. I don't know who they are. What does it say about me? What does it say about, the Bible? What does it say about man's physical form and our spiritual form? all this stuff is a lot for somebody who just wanted to be a full-time podcaster.
I just wanted to talk politics.
Yeah.
And came up with a side gig.
I thought ghost stuff was going to pay the bills at least so I could get everything else going. But after that, the whole table flipped. I did so for years.
So you could have gone a couple directions after this. You could have gotten so freaked out that you just ran the hell away from the whole thing, but you did continue into doing this. So what was sort of your mindset that you had after that first night? Like what I'm trying to get at is kind of like, what was the feeling inside you? Did you feel like, other than just questioning everything now, like, did you feel that you encountered something inherently evil, or was it more just like, we know something weird happened, I'm not sure what it is? Like, where were you in terms of the sort of danger you might face by encountering this sort of thing at that time?
At that time, it was fear. I remember I have a good friend. I consider him a mentor, named Andrew Meyer, and he introduced me to the Kabbalah. And one thing that he tells me not to do is don't talk about your dreams. But I'll talk about my dreams. I've always been a very vivid dreamer. For Second Print Comics patrons, you can hear my Patreon series, Remso Dreams of Dreams, where I talk about some of my crazy dreams and stuff like that.
When did that happen? I don't remember that.
It happened on a day that I forgot to put out an episode, so I thought I'd go ahead and talk about this wild dream I had. Oh, nice. I've done one episode of it, so it counts. But like, I've always been like an extremely vivid dreamer. Like, my parents have always been like, you have some wild ass dreams. And as I began to look into the Bible and stuff, you start looking at at figures that had dreams. And what you begin to realize is that, some dreams are just dreams and some dreams have messages. And the dreams I had that night, because we got back at like 3-4 in the morning, we slept in. I mean, we got late checkout and everything. I was like, we're going to sleep. I had a dream. I was in that building.
Like, I got to go into the dream world. We're sleeping tonight. I got to get a REM, pal.
I was running in a hallway in the building. We hadn't left, and I was just running, and it was like a never ending wall. And at one point the walls closed in. And at the end of it, I'm like, somebody help me. And all I hear is a voice that says, okay. And suddenly I wake up, and I remember, and I look over at the other bed, and Ryan is sleeping there. And I'm just like, okay, well, that was fucking weird. But I was, I was, it's weird, Mark. I was scared for like 5 minutes, but after that, it was like I was running on this high of, I have caught something and I've experienced something insane. So at that point, we're just running around the building trying to, find things that are happening, trying to make something happen. And at that point, it was like I didn't realize what was really happening until the end. And at the very end of the night, what they do is they unlock this boiler room. And inside this boiler room, and this place has been abandoned. It was then bought by, ironically, a former patient who opens it up specifically a few times during the year for Ghost Hunts USA to do this type of stuff. And I don't know if it was my brother or somebody else who spoke to the guy, but they were like, you were a patient here. Why did you buy this place? Why do you allow people in here? And he was like, because, and I don't think this guy was like severely mentally ill. I think he was like dyslexic or something. And they were like, loony bin. So they tossed him in there, because St. Alban Sanatorium closed, I think, in like the mid 80s, early 90s.
And then this guy just bought the property because he felt like it.
He bought the property. Ghost Hunters went there in one of their very early seasons. I was on Jason Haas' radio show in 2017, 2018 talking about it, because he remembered that place very well. It's one of his favorite locations. And, he was just like, I want people to know what this was like. I want people to know what we did and how we treated people for things that we thought were crazy, but were just, dyslexia, depression, anxiety. Like, there were people there that had severe issues. And people have asked me, because I've gone to a couple mental asylums and, looked into a lot of how people were treated and stuff. And they're like, do you believe that it was good for us to shut them down? I actually do not believe that shutting down insane asylums in America was a good idea. I actually think it was a bad idea, because some were a lot worse than others. And overall, I think it was a couple bad ones. And that book and movie, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, that ultimately created this giant propaganda war against insane asylums. But that's a neither here nor there thing. We could talk about
Part
that
of
later.
Remso's political campaign.
Yeah, bring back insane asylums. But
make asylums great again. Yeah.
But they opened up this boiler room, and it was weird because you could really tell, like, if everywhere else looked like it was abandoned and people had been in there, this place looked like it was abandoned, but it was abandoned long before the rest of the building was abandoned. We walk in, and on this pipe that's running across the room, you see somebody had laid down like a dozen cigarettes. And I'm like, well, that's fucking weird. Next thing I go over to the corner of the room, and I see like this white circle in a corner. I couldn't tell if it was chalk or something. And there's like an empty beer bottle there. And I'm like, what the fuck? So immediately I'm just like, this is some exorcist shit. And then we got to the exorcist shit. And this dude who tried convincing us that he was a psychic medium is talking about why he suddenly wanted to become a ghost hunter one day. He's telling us his whole story.
This is one of the other ghost hunter people?
This is one of the other ghost hunters. This is one of the guys who was like in charge of the event that night. He joined us at the end, and we're in this boiler room, and it's him and me and a couple other people. This was like the final send-off type of thing. And he's like, this is a room where demonic activity has been told to have occurred and all this other stuff. And, I'm not afraid of it. And let me tell you why I'm not afraid of it. And he's like, it's because I have Jesus Christ. And he says it, and he's not skipping a beat. And all of a sudden you just hear this voice in the back of the room. And at this point I'm like, oh, this is it. They're fucking with us. Somebody behind me has just gone like, or something like that. There's nobody fucking behind me.
Was it like that same doom demon noise or something?
It was something else. It was like a moan grunt type of thing. It wasn't like what we caught in the recording, but it was enough to be noticeable. And this one chick screams, and Ryan is like, "What was that?" He's trying to swing the camera around.
I think it was like the demonic version of like a groan when he said, "Oh, this guy again," but just in demon.
Yeah, and I'm looking behind me. I'm like, I'm gonna catch whoever did that. There's nobody behind me. So I'm like, unless this guy is a ventriloquist, like what just happened. But then I'm holding an EMF reader. And what he tells me, he looks at me and he looks at another guy with the readers. And at one point he's like, bring the reader closer to me. And it's got, we're not close to outlets or anything. There's nothing really electrical in this boiler room. We get close to him and he's like, it's getting hotter, isn't it? And I'm thinking, oh, the meter. Yeah, it's actually getting to red. It's like we're seeing some electromagnetic frequency. He's like, no, it's getting hotter. Dude, that plastic $20 EMF reader felt like it was scolding my hand. So I'm just like, I toss it to Ryan. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck is happening, but like, this is freaking weird. And like 5 minutes later, he's going through his thing. We're all like, okay, let's go now. And the night was over. And I was just like, unless, up until that point, it's weird, Mark, because I went from entering the place. I'm like, no, this is real. And then we get to the flashlight session and the EMF session and, witnessing some other crazy shit and, talking to spirit box. And I'm like, oh, I'm a believer. Then we go down to the boiler room and this guy's doing his thing and that happens. And I'm like, no, this is bullshit. Then I'm like, wait, this is happening. Then I'm like, no, this is a magic trick. Then I leave and I'm starting to think about it. I'm like, okay, something happened. It was probably some of the most formative hours of my entire life.
Yeah, it's a trip, man. It's got to be like, it's like shattering your worldview and then trying to justify, well, like that. No, there has to be a trick for this extra crazier thing. And then going back to like, oh, it must be a trick. And then it's got to just be a constant up and down mind warp by the end of the
I equate it to that scene in the first Doctor Strange movie where he goes to the Ancient One and he's like, listen,
he drinks the ayahuasca tea.
Does he drink something or does she just like push him and he gets pushed into like...
I never noticed it the first couple times, but right before that, she hands him this tea and he drinks it. And my wife's like, oh, he's drinking the ayahuasca or some MCU version of it. But yeah, I do think that is part of it. He drinks it and then she touches him and he goes.
Yeah. Well, whatever that is, that moment where it's like he's out of his body and he comes back and he looks at her and he's like, teach me. I was kind of like that. I was just kind of like, I got to figure this out. Somebody's got to show me this stuff. Right. There has to be answers because something happened. It wasn't just me. And that was the thing. It was my brother. because if he had any beliefs about this, they were solidified in that. Other people were coming from all types of different areas. Some were just doing this for fun. Some were real ghost hunters. Others, we had some weird ass people too. We have somebody, and this is in the thing. We have somebody who is a cousin of a friend of ours who claims to be a clairvoyant. And I want to preface, if there's any area where I'm still very skeptical, it's people that talk about having abilities. Clairvoyance, psychic,
It's Cleo, man.
people who have lived past lives and stuff like that. I'm very skeptical about the past life thing. I've met like 12 Queen Victorias. But we have a woman in the video who's a cousin of a guy who eventually became a good friend of ours, who claims that she felt something jump into her body. And it was earlier on in the night too. And we see her, and it's like her eyes get really like glassy. Like I was thinking like this woman's like on drugs or something. No, something happened to her. It's like she starts like mumbling to herself, and she's not responsive. And it's like she had like this glaze. I call it like the SSRI look. It's like, I don't know what she's on, but like something is up with this chick. I mean, anything and everything you can imagine. If there weren't other people there, I don't know if I could have come to terms to say to myself, yeah, it was happening, and I'm actually going to go ahead and talk about it. Because if it was just me, it's just
tell yourself you're just losing it, or whatever.
And I've had those moments throughout my entire career of being a paranormal investigator. And what's crazy is when you're just going and having lunch somewhere with your wife, and then something happens, and your investigator brain is like, this is a paranormal phenomenon because X, Y, and Z happened, and given the history of the location, and something else happened, based on how I inferred this information, there's a haunting. And then you're just like, we're at a subway in an old hotel. I didn't really know much about it. Why should I immediately assume it's haunted because something happened? I still jump between it even to this day. But more so, I always end up realizing it's like, no, I doubt myself, because once you understand that we live in a world within another world, this stuff is happening every day. It's just a matter of whether or not we choose to accept that it is occurring or not.
Did you find that even outside of the paranormal investigating, then once you sort of cracked that open, that you started to, I don't know if it's necessarily that the things are happening more around you, or you're experiencing things more around you, or
every day of my life.
It's just that you're more in tune to it now, so you're going to notice what might already be there more.
Every day of my life. I equate it to sports. If you introduce somebody to football and they've never heard of football and they don't know how football is played, can they look at football and identify certain plays that the players are making? Can they identify why something is fouled or what a touchdown is? Can they recognize what is happening? Or do they just see a bunch of stuff happening and they're confused? That's how I equate it. Prior to this, you're watching the game, you have no clue what is happening. Then after this, you learn about the game, you understand football. Now you see everything. Now you enjoy it.
He scored because he threw the ball and they ran across the thing.
Exactly.
I get it.
It's a completely different thing. It's like not knowing a language and then learning a language. Suddenly it opens up everything to you. That is exactly what happened. And that's the thing about it. When you go to places that are haunted, you go there because there's almost a certainty. And after that, it's like part of you has this cognitive dissonance where it's like, well, that place is haunted, but the place next door obviously isn't, or somebody would have said something about it. Well, this can't happen at other places, new buildings, new places, new houses. It can't happen unless somebody else has happened. You feel weird when you start to identify it before anyone else has. And that's the crazy thing. And those have been some of our most insane investigations. The home investigations we did, the private investigations we did were for people where we were the first investigators there, where nobody else did. The first season of The Witching Hour is pretty 50-50. And we primarily filmed all the seasons in Pennsylvania, New York, Maryland, and Virginia. What you begin to realize really quick is that while you will probably immediately recognize the places that have been on TV because of the name association, we went to some places where we were just driving by and we stopped by and we talk to an owner of like an old church or something, and then we talk about what we do, and he tells a story, and then we go there, and then we find out that the place is a full-blown haunting. Like, that's when the real challenge comes. Whether you can identify whether something is haunted or whether something is demonically attached, and you're the only ones that can make that claim, because you don't get to default to authority. You can't say, well, Taps was here. Well, Tennessee Wraith Chasers or, the Ghost Adventures team were here. No, these couple guys of a YouTube channel who got on a couple public access stations early on, are the ones making a definitive claim that something supernatural is occurring. That's just what comes with looking past it and beginning to recognize that the world is different now.
Can you give an example of something that that has happened to you, or that you witnessed or experienced that when you weren't looking for something, when you were just out, doing your thing?
I'm going to tell you about you're going to be the first person I've told this about.
Sweet.
I've told this
exclusive.
to other people.
Marc Claire Show exclusive. Breaking news. I've
told this to other people, but I've never said this. I've never talked about this publicly. We were investigating parts of Manassas battlefield where maybe we shouldn't have been, but we were at night. And there's this place in Manassas battlefield. I grew up in Northern Virginia for over more than 10 years, 2008 to 2021, until I moved. I spent a few years in Alabama in between that with the Army and stuff. But I used to go hiking there on the trails. I'm an avid hiker. So, living next to a whole bunch of battlefields, I would go hiking all the time. And, the battlefield is beautiful. It's one of my favorite places. And there's a trail segment that is unpaved. And what happened on this road was that you had this Confederate officer who was captured by some Union soldiers. It was after the first Battle of Bull Run at Manassas. And what ended up happening was they cut his head off, and then they threw it into like the stream bed, and then a bunch of pigs came by and ate it. Like they were pissed because the Union lost a lot of people there. They were not happy. It was not a good moment for the Union. So they kill this officer, they cut his head off, they throw it down there. After that, for like 100+ years, you've just got nothing but accusations of murder. One thing you have a lot of in Manassas battlefield, especially near private homes, and the Smithsonian has had to get involved in this over the last 5 years. A lot of pits of just body parts have been found, because what you had these medical stations for the Union and the Confederacy, where they were just having hacksaw limbs off and throw them into these giant holes. So you have a lot of those that were found when I was living back home. Like every week it was so another pit of body parts has been found. So we were like crazy. And what we noticed is that a lot of them were along this road, Featherbed Road, because that was part of the Confederate entrenchment. So given the history of that, given the battlefield, given the legends and stuff like that, what you also had a lot of in the 80s was satanic panic. And you have teens and you have cults going out there. Some of it documented. Other of it is just, what you hear from locals of people going out there practicing Santeria, practicing, Luciferian, satanic worship, that type of stuff. So obviously, if there's one place we want to go.
Do you think that area is chosen for that kind of stuff for a reason, because it's a place where there was so much death and that sort of like energy that goes with that?
Absolutely. There are three types of things I'll say about that. You've got what I call Civil War hauntings, stuff tied to a specific event. You have post-war hauntings, which are hauntings tied to an area but not tied to the Civil War. And then you have demonic activity. And because you're dealing with demons, you're dealing with stuff that is outside of the concept of time. Was it here later? Was it here after? Is it currently here now? So you're dealing with war after war and something that time is not bound to. But we were learning about this, and we were like, we want to go out there and film some shit. So we do go out there, and it was primarily Ryan and one of our other investigators and cameramen, Brian Sujanen. They went out there while I was actually out of state doing some stuff. But we were going to film a full episode there, and we were going to start from one end of the road. I think it's 4 or 5 miles, and we're going to go all the way to the other. And I had already been out there with Ryan once, and we got some strange shit. But there was this really old church, this really old Methodist church. And what we wanted to do, because we were worried about park rangers, because we had some altercations with park rangers before, we wanted to go ahead and park our vehicle at this church, but we also didn't want to freak them out or anything. And this place is old. Like, it's one of the oldest churches in the state of Virginia. So what we did to be nice was we basically just told them what we were going to do. We reached out to the secretary and we were like, hey, this is who we are. This is what we do. We understand this might be frowned upon, but we just want to be upfront about it. Can we park our car there? And this woman is like, yeah, you could do that. And we didn't want anything out of it. We just want to make sure they weren't going to call the cops on us or tow our vehicles. Because we had another friend of mine who was going to come out and do this with us. So at the end of the call, this woman's just like, by the way, do you guys want to check out the church? And we were like, okay, sure. Like, what would we check out about? She's like, oh, it's historic and, it's kind of old and, stuff. And we're just like, what stuff? So I go there. So Ryan is like, I've got this thing I have to go to. You go there and you meet with them. I meet with her and I meet with one of the other members of the council or board or whatever. And they're walking me throughout this building and they're talking to me about its heritage and everything and its history. And it was bombed in the Civil War. It was struck by lightning and burnt down. It's gone through multiple revisions. The cemetery is super old and all this other stuff. And it backs up right into Featherbed Road. So we were thinking, oh, we can go through the cemetery to go through the forest that the road hugs. So it's like you've got the cemetery and the church on one side, you've got the road on the other, and then you've got the forest, the stream bed and everything right behind it. So it's like, oh, we just got access to a whole lot more and this is going to be crazy. And then they're like, yeah, if you guys want to spend like an hour inside at night and just, film the inside of the church for stuff, you could do that. And we're just like, I'm looking at her and I'm looking at him and we're all just looking at each other. I'm just like, does something happen here? And they're like, no. And they're looking at each other oddly. And I'm just like, what the fuck is happening? So we only intend on collecting B-roll outside of the church and the church cemetery. As I'm walking out, it's just me and those two people there. It's our only two vehicles in the parking lot. They're staying inside to take care of some stuff. I'm walking out. I'm walking past the cemetery. A rock hits me. And I'm like, the fuck? And I look around.
Like a tiny pebble, or how big a rock are we talking about?
It was a small rock, like a little, like it could be a pebble, but it was a little bit bigger than a pebble. It was like a rock, and it just hits me in the arm, and I'm just like, what the fuck? So I'm thinking like, oh, it's a kid or something. I look around, and there's no one there. I come back later with Ryan, my girlfriend's now wife, and a friend of ours, and as we're walking back in, she gets hit with a rock. And I'm just like, what happened? She's like, a rock. Someone just threw a rock at me. So at that point, I'm like, what the fuck? That night was genuinely one of the most terrifying nights of my life. And I've had several of those when going out and investigating. This giant ass church was just something was up with it. And during that night, one of our, my friend, my buddy who came to film with us, who was an atheist at the time. Later, I realized that, he turned out to be a pagan later, like paganism, that type of stuff. It was crazy. He starts getting these cuts on his hands, and that's really fucking weird. We start hearing as we're just setting up, like we're not even filming yet. We're setting up. We start hearing somebody run up and down the second floor. It's a 2-story church. We hear somebody running up and down. So we're like, are we the only ones in here? We're going around locking the doors. Lights are turning on and off. The place had central heating and cooling and stuff. It was a modernized church, but it would just drop to like 30 degrees at like a moment's notice and then come back up to 70. And it's the summer in Virginia. It's really humid. And, that's happening. I had something touch me. We tried doing a Phasma box session at one point.
What is a Phasma box?
A Phasma box.
Same thing as a spirit box that you mentioned that earlier.
Exact same thing. Same thing. Yeah. So we used one. We used one that was basically an AM/FM radio with the modulator adjusted, so that way it would constantly tune. But then we had another software on one of our old laptops that acted basically the same way, except it worked through Wi-Fi. So we test these two things because we want to see if one's coming out the other, what is the other one going to do? So we use that as kind of like a control factor. We use a scientific method for everything. You have your control, then you have your random variable, and then you test it a few times to see whether or not you can get some type of consistency. And it's not saying that just because something happens multiple times, it's definitely happening. Sometimes stuff has happened only once, and that's enough to convince us. I can kind of get into that later, but we're doing a Phasmobox session in the meeting room upstairs. The temperature drops. We've got flashlight there. The flashlight starts going off. And then I just remember asking, it's like, if something is here, can somebody touch me? And Mark, as I live and breathe and speak to you right now, I shit you not, something put its hand on my shoulder and brushed up my neck behind my ear. And
like seductively or
like you remember Bane from The Dark Knight Rises,
of course,
when he's dealing with Daggert, that evil billionaire that doesn't like Bruce Wayne, and when he's yelling at Bane, Bane just puts his hand on his shoulder and he's like, "Do you feel in charge of the situation? Do you feel in charge?" That's kind of how it was.
If Bane was Sean Connery, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I felt something just put its hand, and I try not to say what it is, and it's a pronoun thing. No, it's actually because I don't know whether I'm dealing with a disembodied spirit or if I'm dealing with a demon. So I just call them it. It puts its hand on me, brushes up my neck behind my ear, and it was like ice. I was just like, this is cold. It feels like a hand. I could feel fingers. I could feel fucking fingers. It's brushing up my neck behind my ear, and it took its time. It was like 4 or 5 seconds. And I just remember,
must feel like an eternity when you're being.
It was because I was like, for a moment, I'm thinking somebody is behind me, and I know my brother is here, and I know my friend Mike is in front of me. Here's where things get wild. Flashlight
Here's where things get wild.
Here's where things get more wild. Flashlight stays on. Both Spirit Box and Phasma Box, the batteries were completely charged, dropped to zero. Mike, my friend in front of me, atheist, pagan, whatever he wanted to call himself, he puts his arms out like this and he looks at me, and then he's like, something touched me. A moment after that just happened to me. And I'm like, what touched you? And Ryan is putting the camera in front of him. He's like, I felt something start to touch and run its fingers up my neck. And I'm like, that happened to me a moment ago. And he was like, just when you started flinching. I'm like, just when I started flinching. Now, here's where things get even more fucking wild. We get our cables from downstairs. We're downstairs. We hear something running, like, and then it starts rushing, like, like stomping. And we're just like, somebody is in the fucking building with us. We go back upstairs. This time we're taking still photography over all our faces, over the door, a gray mass. We're shooting with the flash on and the flash off. We're like, something is happening in this room. We get the Phasma boxes back running, and it says my friend's name, Mike, and we're trying to figure out more of what it is.
So
and we're
just to be clear, the Phasma box basically is like, it's almost like a radio tuner, and the idea is it can pick up certain frequencies so you can hear these spirits or something.
Exactly. Sorry I didn't explain it. Basically, something's going to interrupt the tuning and you're going to get solid words out. And what you're looking for is you're looking for words that are in relation to your specific time, place, and environment, as well as consistency and continuity of words. You're looking for sentences. You're looking for two words that closely associate to each other, given the context of where you are and things that may have happened there. If you're dealing with a murder, you want to hear somebody talk about things that could deal with a murder, maybe a description of the suspect, maybe a time and place, maybe a weapon or something like that. So you're looking for that type of stuff. But anyway, we plug them into the outlets. We're trying to get stuff going again. And we're like, do you want anything? And it says Mike. And we're like, okay, like, what do you want from Mike? And it says Mike again. So at this point, we're like, it's saying his name. It's saying the name of one of us. That is enough to be concerned about. And then we're like, what do you want Mike to do? And out of fucking nowhere, it's just like, jump. And we're like, jump. Out window. There's a large window behind me where I'm sitting. So he was facing it. My back is to it. We're on the second floor. That window, if he jumped out the window, would have landed him in front of the building. So we're like, you want Mike to jump out the window? And it's like, yes. So then now at this point, I'm like, why the fuck is it talking about you, Mike?
I'm Mike. I'm getting the fuck out of there.
Okay. Mike, my pagan friend, who I knew from the army. Somebody
I do wonder. So was he calling himself pagan at this time, at this moment?
He kind of was. He kind of was. Here's
I do wonder if there's a reason that he is the one targeted out of this.
There is a reason. Because he, about to get out of the army, had just gotten a new tattoo on his arm. And I'm like, what's that tattoo on your arm, Mike? He's like, oh, it's from this show called Supernatural. And I'm like, that doesn't tell me shit. What's the tattoo? He's like, oh, well, on the show, this tattoo is the mark of Cain. So I'm like, motherfucker.
Things I could have known a little earlier.
We're like,
before we started ghost hunting with you.
It was like 4 hours in. I'm like, what the fuck? And yeah, Mike had some changes after he started getting into the paranormal and stuff like that. But like what we go through it, we go through the cemetery, more shit happens. I'm fast forwarding through a lot, but what's wild is at around 3 a.m., the witching hour, the devil's hour, we're in the main church body room. And as we're like talking, and this is like on a Thursday night in the summer at 3 a.m, as we're trying to collect evidence in front of the pew, in front of the front pew in front of the altar, all the lights in the building turn on. And we have this on film. I think for certain reasons, we didn't put out the full thing. We did put out some clips though, where we had to obscure some of the details about the church because some people did not want their church to be associated with this. But at that minute, all the lights in the building turn on and we're like, fuck, what is happening? The church pianist walked into the building and we're like, hey man, like, what are you doing here at 3 a.m? And he's 3 a.m. At 3 a.m, we're like, hey man, who are you? What are you doing here? And he's like, hey, who are you three? What the fuck are you doing here? So briefly, because we're worried this guy's gonna call the cops on us, and Ryan is like, we should call the cops on him. I'm like, let me use diplomacy. He tells us that this is when he likes to come to the church because it's quiet, and this was the only time he had to come practice. So we're just like, what the fuck? And we tell him, listen, so-and-so, the church secretary and one of the board members wanted us to come do this. They thought that something was happening. So at that point, he's freaked out. We're freaked out. We're like, you know what? We're done. We're fucking done. We're going to go home. This guy is like, hey, I want to talk to you about something. And he starts telling us about his experiences at the church and all this other stuff. Long story short, because that was that night, but we had done 3 more investigations of that church. What we basically realized is that man had a demonic attachment. There had been a demonic presence in the church, outside the church, in the cemetery, all around that freaking area. And what made it fucking wilder was that the Smithsonian found on the church property, like not immediately next to the church, but like where the old foundation was during the Civil War, when, before it got like destroyed by Union artillery, they found a pit of body parts. So everything you could possibly want stacked on top of each other, because we encountered what we believe to be the spirit of the church music instructor who had recently died. And mind you, we didn't know anything about any of these people. We're just looking at our footage, our notes and everything. And we're sitting down with not just the secretary, not just that board member. We're sitting down with like 7 people who were all told about what we did. And we're just like, hey, does this name ring a bell? Yes. Was this name a woman who liked music? Yes. Who is this? That was our music instructor who just died of cancer 2 months ago. And all this other stuff. And I'm like, what's in the backwoods? And they're like, the kids say it's the brown man. And I'm like, what's the brown man? They're like, it's a person who stands behind one of the trees and peeks out and stares at the children. And I'm like, have you ever seen the brown man? And they're like, yes. And I'm like, when? And they were like, I saw the brown man when I was here as a child at going to church here with my family in 1979. And I'm like, what the fuck? What is happening here, people?
It's like you stumbled upon some little Stephen King church here.
It literally was. And
Children of the Corn.
there was a lot of stuff going on within the church too. Basically, the minister ends up leaving. The church staff all quit within like a year. We tried to get back in because we're like, listen, we worked with so and so. We could show you this stuff. They elected a brand new board. The board wanted nothing to do with us. And at that point, Ryan and I, after some negotiating back and forth, they were basically like, put something out and something's going to happen, which is always, we'll sue you. So at that point, it was just like, this isn't worth it. This isn't worth it. But it was in that moment, and that was still very early on. I don't even think we were the witching era at the time. I think we were still in the Haunted Republic phase. That was us as baby investigators. That was just a period where it's like I was saying earlier. It's like we were the first ones there. We had no prior evidence to go off of. I was terrified. I was utterly terrified. And that was around the same summer I got physically attacked by a demonic entity too, which was also kind of fucking scary. But what was scary about this situation is, at least at that one, I had my father with me. At least I had my father with me and my brother and stuff. Whereas this time it was just me, Ryan, my friend Mike, and it was just the three of us. And it was just, it felt more isolating. Let's put it that way. I genuinely felt that, if something happens to us here, who knows that we're here? We don't know these people. We don't know if they've done something. We don't know anything about this place. At least at the other places, I had some context to pull some thoughts from that I could put together to understand what is happening. Here, I am just running blind. I am running blind. And, it is, when people are like, oh, did it touch you? It's like, no, it was not a faint touch. It was not, just maybe something brushed against me. It wasn't a bug. It wasn't dust. It wasn't a spider's web. As you can grab your own arm, that's how I felt something touching me. And I have felt that several times. I felt this in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania at Suicide Bridge, known as Sachs Bridge, in which on footage I was attacked.
That's the one where you're the most visibly shaken, I would say.
Yeah. And I'm bending in ways. I was not a flexible person at the time too. I am bending in ways back and forth. I do not move. I physically felt like I could not breathe, like somebody jumped on my back, and you see me puke all over the fucking bridge. They still talk about that on that, when they take tour groups there, because that was a location that was popular for ghost tours in the area. They talk about the guy who came here, agitated a demonic entity, and then attacked him, and they puked on the bridge. And they point to the spot where I puked. I became a local thing, but no, it gets scary. There have been some places where a lot of activity happens and I'm not scared. But, when I talk scary now, like my meter for my fear tolerance is different. I genuinely only get scared at haunted locations when I am genuinely thinking that something here has the intent of harming me.
And is that something that you can like now sort of feel or detect by sort of just being in a place or by some of the activity that you see there?
Yeah.
So you can kind of tell if it's like a Casper to the Friendly Ghost situation or just something that's just maybe it'll respond and do some things, but it's not. It's just kind of maybe being silly, so to speak, or whatever.
I mean, people, I treat, and this bothers some ghost hunters. And I've spoken about this on Jim Harold's podcast a couple of times. I was on his Campfire podcast and stuff like that too. And people get mad. They're like, you don't call the spirits and stuff like that. And it's like, because I don't know if they're the spirits. Because it could be, it's like, I call it, it's basically like going on like one of those chat roulette rooms in the early days of the internet. You don't know who's on the other end. Right. And you don't even know if they're telling you the truth.
Right. And that is a subject I really want to dig into more. And we will in the smoke-filled room in just a bit. But I'll let you wrap up if you had more on that story. But we'll wind things down in a second and dig into that a little bit more in there. But why don't you wrap up and then just let everybody know where they can find, because you can describe this stuff, but everybody can also go see it on, I believe, the Argos Paranormal YouTube channel. So just let them know all the ways they can find all of this archive of material related to all of your ghost hunting stuff.
Yeah. Over 5 years of ghost hunting, I've gone to everywhere from old hotels to mansions, the birthplace of James Madison, farms, churches, insane asylums, prisons, you name it. We've gone everywhere. And what I stress a lot of people. And, I was telling this to a lot of like young reporters later, because I saw what I was doing is basically adventure journalism. Is you have to be brave enough to question, and you have to go into things with an open and objective mind. And ultimately you might not get super clear answers, but it's the pursuit of that knowledge, which I think guides us. And the most important thing that I try to carry through my life is an understanding that, this is not just our life, is that something existed before us, something exists after us, and that, our mortal flesh will, die one day, but our spirits live on. And, we have to understand is that we live not in just a physical realm, but we live between a battle of principalities. And that might not, that might be a bit heavy for some people, but it's here, it's happening all around you. And, people wondered why we ended the show, and we did. And it was simple. We answered the question. We did the best we could. We answered the question, and we didn't need to push more out because we didn't want to become too commercialized and stuff. And, that's it sometimes. Sometimes the answer is we don't know, or something is happening, but we don't know what it is yet. So, please go ahead and check out all our bonus stuff, all our episodes, Argos Paranormal on YouTube, and check out all the documentaries and stuff we've ever done, articles about us, interviews I did, and more at argosparanormal.com.
All right, Remso.
We're also on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can see photos and stuff.
Indeed. Well, Remso, you can find his work at everywhere he just mentioned. And of course, you can find him every week with yours truly on the Second Print Comics podcast. Remso, we're going to hop into the smoke-filled room, but thanks for coming on my show.
Let's do it to it, Mark. Thanks again.
Boom. Just like that. It just happens. It's seamless. And we are here. It's always a challenge. How do we get weirder from a show like that, from some crazy stories like that? But one thing I want to dig into that's been on my mind this whole time which is kind of sort of a distinction that you brought up towards the end, is that, we hear a lot about ghost stories, ghosts, this and that, a haunted place, haunted that, but especially now, and this might turn back a little bit more to your demonology learnings as well. And what you said earlier, that you don't know if they are if that's what this is, or if they're even telling the truth. And I think that's just, it's an interesting distinction, because if it's not a ghost in the sense of a classic ghost that like we might think of, a spirit that just got trapped somewhere, if it's actually some kind of demon, then it really changes a little bit of the spiritual dynamic in a sense, because a ghost you might even think could not be there on purpose, or, could have been trapped there by an unfortunate circumstance of their death, or whatever it may be. But a demon, if it's a demon acting as a spirit, there's almost no way that can be seen as anything but malevolent if it's deceiving you into thinking it is some ghost or is some spirit. And I'm curious if you, in your sort of experiences here, if you feel if you feel there are both, first of all, that exist. Do you think there are demons that that might inhabit an area or be attached to a person and even act as ghosts and try to pretend they're ghosts at sometimes? And do you think there are also separately, perhaps, actual ghosts and spirits of once alive humans?
Yeah. Where to start with that?
Yes.
I 100% believe in demons. I 100% believe in demons. And people are often like, well, what do you mean by demons? And I'm talking the demons that Jesus Christ cast out from people. I'm talking about the demons that, were sent to harm biblical prophets. I'm talking about the demons that, taunted the apostles. I'm talking about the demon army that, is commanded by Satan, Lucifer, the devil himself. And they've been around since the dawn of time. They were there at the creation of everything created by God, and that they rejected God, and that they were cast out to be cursed, to walk eternity, distanced from God, because they chose that. They know who he is. They know who they were. They know what they did, and they hate him. They're repulsed by his name. They're repulsed by the name of his son, Jesus Christ. And what they want to do is they want to drag the living to hell. I forget who said it. I think it was ironically Mike Tyson. I'm a big, fight sports guy for people that follow me on Twitter and know me a little bit. Mike Tyson once said, those who are favored by God are favored by the devil, because the devil knows that. Yeah, Mike Tyson.
I thought you were going to use everyone's got a plan for their punch in the mouth.
Well, I'll say like Mike Tyson, those who are favored. No, I'm not going to do that. That's mean. Those who are favored by the God are favored by the devil, because you know of his existence and you know of his ability. And once he knows, that he tries to drag you to hell with him, because what they want nothing more to do is to distance you from God. And because of that, they go after everybody. So yeah, I do believe in that. To your question of will they pretend to be things? Will they pretend to be people? Absolutely. We've got this on the show on the final episode of the Witching Hour season 1. Ryan hates it when this happens, because you have these ghost hunters that we've collaborated with who are like, oh, we're dealing with a child spirit. It's talking to me. It thinks because,
they just take it on its face value. That
oh my gosh, yeah, they just believe everything. And I'm like, you don't know what that fucking thing is. And Ryan goes a step further. Ryan, I don't remember what, oh yeah, I remember we were at this old theater in West Virginia. We went to West Virginia. We were at this old theater, suicide, murder, everything you'd possibly want. It was a tuberculosis ward. This one woman who thought she was a witch and stuff is like, oh, this child is talking to me. It thinks I'm its mother, talking through a spirit box and stuff like that. And Ryan is like, no, bitch, it wants to drag you to hell. So at that point, Ryan has just pissed off everyone. They're like, no, it's talking to her because it thinks that she's his mother.
And Ryan probably pissed off the thing too.
Yeah, so Ryan starts like questioning this thing, and he's getting like these answers back through the spirit box, through some trigger items we had some toys and stuff on the stage. You see this, so I'm like sitting down, I've got the laptop up with the spirit box software on there. Ryan is in the corner with a flashlight. I think he's got some dowsing rods too.
He's grilling him like he's like,
so,
all right, you're this guy. So
I was like, I wasn't even good cop, I was like quiet cop. I'm like, something's kind of off with this whole thing. And Ryan is like mean cop, and I don't know what happens, but you hear something, you hear like footsteps like running towards Ryan. And then he says he heard something. I heard the footsteps. I didn't hear what came afterwards. It doesn't come out in the video either. But Ryan is like, I heard something. And next thing you know, the spirit box I'm holding goes off. So as soon as whatever is running towards Ryan, making a noise at him, is doing that, the spirit box just goes off. And Ryan starts screaming, holy fuck, oh my fucking God. And he runs and he leaves me there. And I'm just like frozen. And there's a camera on me. And I'm just like, Ryan, what the fuck happened? And he's just like out of the theater. He ran out of the fucking theater. It's hilarious. But here's where it's not so funny. We come back and we don't get, the little, like, it sounded like a feminine voice coming through the spirit box and stuff like that. It sounded, with the information that it was a quote child, it sounded like a little girl or something. Once we get back in there, and it wasn't just like this for us, it was like this for the other investigators we were there. Once anyone tries talking to the quote little girl, that's fucking gone. It's like, what's your name? It's like, and it's just like, what the fuck? You start getting this dark masculine voice. And then that's when, this environment of, oh, it's peaceful. Oh, it's playing with a flashlight. It's playing with dowsing rods. It's pushing a ball and stuff like that. No, that shit ends. You're dealing with clanging and banging and things moving, and just it became threatening overnight. And what that's just one example from the show, but I've spoken to people who have been in homes where they believe that they're dealing with the haunting of a loved one or something like that. And to answer your other question, yes, I do believe that there are human spirits trapped on Earth. I have a reason why I say that. I do think that happens, but I do think that demons can pretend to be people, either people we know or people we don't know, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to open up a connection. They're trying to make you spiritually vulnerable. There's a reason why in the Bible they tell you not to talk to unclean spirits, and people have criticized me for why I do this, and I say, judge me however you want. I'm doing it because I have, as a side thing, I brought more people to Christianity through this show than any fucking street preacher I've ever met in my life. And all the evangelism students at Liberty University who criticized me when I started doing this, I have gotten more emails, texts, and phone calls, more face-to-face interactions with people telling me, you didn't make me do this. You didn't talk to me about this. You just brought me on the stuff, or I watched your stuff and I came to these conclusions myself. What happens is demons will take the appearance of a human that you're familiar with or not, and they will attempt to create a connection, develop a relationship, make you spiritually vulnerable. And then that's when you get the different phases of what will lead to possession and ultimately the death of the person who's being inflicted.
Because these spirits have information. They can see what's going on in the world. So they can use information that maybe might prove they are the ghost of somebody who would only have that information. which might make you think, oh, that's the ghost of that person. But it could also just be the spirit who can see the world and has access to things to mimic that person.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're smart. They've been here since the creation of
Yeah, they've
time.
been doing this for a while.
Yeah, they're experts in damnation. Like they know exactly what they're doing. So yeah, in terms of spirits, and it depends on your Catholic. If you're dealing with like your Northern Virginia, DC elite Catholic, they're Catholic, but they don't believe in demons. They don't believe in the physical resurrection. They don't believe in virgin birth. They don't believe in demons. They believe
sounds like a very boring version of things.
Liberal Catholics, liberal Christians. But I mean, most Catholics are willing to agree with me on this. It's the concept of purgatory, which I think there was a reason why many Catholic priests and why Protestants in America have attempted to abandon purgatory. I think it's actually a very intentional and deviant plot. But purgatory,
kind of like the waiting room.
Purgatory is the waiting room. Purgatory is you're in the love of God,
where you're only supposed to be for like a second. And if you're just traversing through, but for some reason, perhaps
you could be there for years.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But in theory, in the normal process, you're just sort of like passing through.
You die.
Maybe time doesn't even have the right meaning in this context anyway. But that's maybe what a ghost, a real quote unquote real ghost would be a spirit who's kind of trapped in that purgatory in a sense and hasn't gone all the way, but it still has an attachment to the
exactly. And I mean, I think the proper terms is like you're in the love of God. Like God knows what you're capable of, but you didn't get a chance to fully do something. And usually it's like, did you fully accept Christ, or was there a specific thing that prevented you from being completely in God's love? Like he knows you, but you needed to know it yourself. So he's giving you an extra chance. But I genuinely believe.
So you think, just to dig into that more, so you think that they can continue almost like their life as a spirit to see if they can get there or to get all the way there, so to speak?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
I wonder how you prove that as a spirit, Maybe someday like, all right, I get it. I get point made.
There's a story. I talked about it on my old podcast On the Run, where there was this Catholic priest. It's documented, and there's physical evidence, there's witness testimonies, and there was an investigation done by the Vatican. But at this old nunnery or convent, there used to be this priest. I think it was like in New York in like the 60s or something. This priest dies, and then these nuns start like freaking out because in his old bedroom and stuff is flying. They're hearing things. They think they're seeing him. So what they do is they contact the archdiocese, and as they're starting to do their investigation, what they hear one night is they hear screaming from the room, and when they open his door, they see 2 burnt handprints on this door. And I don't know what they did. The guy who told it to me briefly, and later I found the documents talking about this thing. But basically, what the information they gathered after that was that priest did something wrong. He did something wrong. And in Catholicism, you have to have, typically, if you have the opportunity, last rites, last confession, that type of thing. This guy did something wrong, like something really wrong, something he thinks separated him from God. But he loved God, and he didn't really want to go to hell. So essentially what he was in purgatory. So then what happens is they essentially do a pseudo last rites, last confession. They do several stages of an exorcism, which is weird because it's like they're exorcising a room because there's no physical body there. And then, what they believe was him finally entering into heaven was when they faced the door, the hand marks are gone. And nothing else ever happened after that. It's more
like the spirit is holding on for whatever reason, because they do have that connection to God, but they know or have the sense that like, I'm going the wrong direction if I go right now. So I got to like grasp onto this kind of thing, or they just don't accept what's happening.
Yeah. I think it's an either or situation. I don't think it has a clear answer, but the Bible does talk about, us making a distance, and that kind of happening. It's also another thing though, where it's like, other people will try and say, well, what does my religion say about this? What does my religion say about that? And then they get mad at me because I give them the answers. It's like, this can't happen in Buddhism because Buddhism does not believe that the spirit has any type of free will when it comes to that. Buddhism, you're going through the Eightfold Path, and you're going through a constant cycle of regeneration and reincarnation until you reach enlightenment. You're not going to be a ghost if you're a Buddhist. The only things like that in Buddhism are demons. When it comes to Islam, God knew your heart. He checked your scale. You're going to hell. You're going to heaven. So there is no in between. That's where you get jinns. And in Judaism, it's
jinns are essentially demons. I mean,
they're
same thing.
Yeah, they're same things.
But they might come out of it. They might grant you some wishes, but you know.
Yeah, there's a point I'm trying to get to with that though. In Judaism, it's almost the same thing. It's like if you follow this certain set of rules and you did it to a T and you didn't break them, it's automatic. There is no in between. Christianity is the only one that even will, and I'm not gonna say will, I will say will consider there being an in between, because ultimately it comes down to an acceptance of Jesus Christ. And Muslims will say, well, he never said he was God. It's like, well, his friend said he was God a lot. He said, I am God. I am the Alpha and Omega. I'm the beginning of the end. Those who wish to go to the Father must first go through me. I will sit at the right hand of God. I am the prophecies foretold and incarnate. Like he says it over and over again. They are the I am declarations. I am God. Jesus came on a suicide mission, and he did so for people that had died and for all that would eventually die. And he did so that way the separation between them and God would no longer be tied to rules and customs. It would be tied to a genuine relationship between man and man's creator, as seen through the Son, which is part of the Holy Trinity. How is it that a being of pure judgment, yet a being of pure forgiveness and love, of all power and all knowingness, would not try and save its creation as much and to the last point possible? Because if we believe that this is just us here in physical form and that there is life afterwards, who is to say that it's, physical form dies, game over, immediate judgment? Who's to say that there's not one more chance? And, you know, when we're talking about time and stuff like that, I mean, time is relative. I mean, God sees 100 years in a second. It means nothing. He is omnipotent. He is here yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Time has no meaning. He exists throughout all existence. This also makes it complicated for the spirit argument, though. And this is where I always say I don't know what he or she is. I call it, because I'm going to lean more on the side of demons. Have you ever watched one of the international ghost hunting shows where they go like France or Spain or Italy or something?
Can't say I have. Honestly, your show is the most ghost hunting shows I've watched. I never really got into them.
Well, there are some internationals. Like there was Ghost Hunters International and some other international ghost shows like Most Haunted, where they go to non-English speaking countries. And as they're speaking to what they believe are spirits from like the Renaissance or medieval period, or even like 100 years ago, what you have is a strange phenomenon of the spirits talking back or attempting to communicate in English.
They always sound like they're from the Bronx for some reason.
They always sound like they're from the Bronx. Like, why is it they're speaking?
Hey, yo, it's me. Yeah, Vinny. Like,
why are they speaking
from the 1500s?
Yeah, it's like, why are they speaking to you?
I'm walking
in English?
here.
So I think, you know, it's like if we have to assume that they're stuck in time, affixed to time, why would they speak English? It's like, how would they even know who you are? There's different types of hauntings too. They're cognizant, full on hauntings where you're dealing with a sentient conscientious entity that knows that it has been displaced by time, but time has continued and it can interact with you. You have others that are more like playbacks, like a spiritual energy has been left behind. And while stuff can mimic the behaviors and actions of what could be a human spirit, it's not cognizant. Like something is there, like a remnant, like a VHS tape. You can rewind and fast forward as much as you can, but it's not cognizant because it's not really there. But something happened that left a spiritual imprint on that. So I mean that's a couple things. So I don't go into a lot of things thinking at the very beginning, and this was where I had to kind of like, eat my words. At the very beginning, I was like, everything's demonic. I'm surrounded by demons. This is all evil. Later, I had to walk it back, and I spoke about this with Jim Harold on his paranormal podcast. And because it's the #1 in the world, everyone was just suddenly like, "You said you were wrong." And I was like, "I was wrong, and it's because I learned and I changed my mind." I believe that there is an in between. I believe that purgatory is real, and I believe that purgatory is here on Earth. And I believe that purgatory is not a place where we're just sent to wander for forever, where we wander until a purpose is met. And I think that's done not out of punishment. I think that's done out of love. Because if you really did reject it, and it's never God does not send people to hell. And I don't like it when I hear other Christians and people who believe in heaven and hell say that. God does not send people to hell. We choose hell. He did everything ever possible as the creator of everything, who doesn't have to do anything to make sure that we can live in existence with him. And we choose hell, and we choose whether or not we even take that opportunity. And it's not because we even deserve it. We don't. That's what makes Christianity so much starkly different from other religions. It's that our God came and died for us, to be with us, to save us, and we did not deserve it. Everything else is just, you're fucked. It's an opportunity, not because he needs to see you do it, but because you need to do it for a moment of reflection, for a moment of acceptance, to achieve something that's going to be a greater purpose that's beyond our comprehension. And that's another thing too. I don't use a lot of words to describe demons. I don't try and give them praise. I also don't try and ascribe a lot of words to God. It's like, a lot of like modern day evangelical songs and stuff is like, God is an awesome God. It's like, I think the Greek Orthodox actually have a pretty good idea of this. It's like, we don't use words to ascribe to God, because even the biggest of our words can't even touch him. It's beyond comprehension. We don't even try. And I try and ascribe to that too. It's like, I don't even try, because where knowledge ends, faith has to begin. And that's the thing that I have learned through all of this, through trying to filter this as much as possible. And mind you, I'm pretty open-minded, more open-minded than a lot of people would say I am, because they're like, oh, he's a Christian, he's all this other stuff. I'm friends with pagans, white witches, former dark arts, Satanists, that type of stuff. People who are psychics, people who are mediums, people who are clairvoyants. I've had some people who have abilities who, a lot of them I don't believe, but the ones I do believe, I absolutely believe it. People who have told me things about myself who I didn't even seek out, who have given me information about things that drastically impacted my life. And we live in multiple realms at once. And I think the more we try and understand, we just get to the point where I've kind of gotten, which is, I'm not going to learn more, and that's okay. I got to the end, and this is where faith has to come in.
Yeah, I think at some point you realize, like, the quest for, and I'm like one of these people that always wanted to get to the bottom of things. Like, I'm always like the Fox Mulder. Oh, I got to get to the bottom of what UFOs are, what this is, what that is. And I still am that person in many ways. But at some point, you do have to just sort of like let go and realize, like, you can theorize, you can try to understand things, you can gain perspective, but the quest for knowledge is never ending. So at some point, you have to sort of let it go a little bit and just, maybe learn as much as you can, have your theories, sort of try to figure out as best you can what is going on out there, so to speak. But at some point, you got to realize, I'm not going to understand everything. We can barely understand this tiny, much of a sliver of our reality. So to actually think we can get it or fully grasp it, give it up, friends. It's never ending.
I've got a theory on UFOs.
Okay, well, let's, I got about negative 1 minute, but let's do it.
I'll make it really fast. I believe a lot of UFO sightings are actually just spiritual energy projecting in a way that we can physically see it.
Absolutely. The more I've looked into this stuff and all these things that have interested me since I was a kid, whether it's ghosts, whether it's UFOs, whether it's like cryptids and Bigfoot, the more I think we're all it is all part of sort of the same thing. Maybe there are different aspects of the thing, but it's all our glimpses into whatever part of the spiritual realm can somehow make its way here and interact with us. And that is probably the extremely tiny part of that realm. But I think there are ways that it does interact. And I think maybe all of those things in some way, shape, or form. Now, some of them might be actual fucking Bigfoot. I don't know. And some of them might be actual craft and machines that the government works on. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, I think there's absolutely a spiritual element to probably a large portion of it.
Yeah, completely agree.
All right. Well, I think that's a fine way to wrap things up. Remso, I think there are hours and upon hours of stories within here. So that perhaps this is something we'll return to someday. In the meantime,
you got to watch all the episodes, Mark. It's all there
Fred,
for you.
That's your homework. That's your homework. That's everyone's homework. It's to go subscribe to Argos Paranormal, watch all this shit, and then we'll see. Any chance that, I mean, I know you put it to rest. I know you put the show away, but is there any chance that for some reason or another, you might end up getting inspired to do another one of these?
You know, and I know you're running late, so I'll try and make this really fast. I still do investigations. I still do ghost hunts. I did one during my honeymoon at the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. And I mean, you know, it never ended. I think what's fun now is that now that the show ended, when Ryan and I and our friends and everyone have gone on investigations and stuff, we don't feel like we're obligated to prove anything anymore. And you spend so much time filming and setting up and collecting B-roll and traveling and all this stuff. It took a lot of the fun out of it. I think at that point, it's like the documentary stage was good because now, having reached the full knowledge of what I'm going to be able to obtain, now I can just feel like an explorer again. So no, I don't think we're going to do one ever again. Never say never, but I mean, it's not like this phase ended. It's not like, oh, all the paranormal stuff aside. No, it changed everything going forward, and the adventure continues, whether people are going to see it with me or not.
That is a good way to put it. Maybe the cameras are just off is the difference. Well, if you want to, maybe it won't be about ghosts, but maybe sometimes it will be. Be sure to tune in to Remso and I every single week. You can hear this witty banter over in the Second Print Comics podcast. Even if you don't like comics, if you like us ranting, it's there for you. So, Remso, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a blast, and I'll see you in probably a couple of days to record another podcast.
Always a pleasure.